Hello, all. This is the PS podcast, and I'm your host Chaitanya. Before we start today's episode, me and Nishi would like to deeply thank each and every one of you who has appreciated our work and tuned into this podcast. We have a lot of road to cover, but it is getting easier with each one of you joining in this journey. Next, we would like to wish everyone a safe and secure stay during this turbulent time. We hope that the current onslaught of biological and economic problems have not affected you or your dear ones, and it never does. But we shall always remember the ones who have been affected by all this. Please try to help the people in your vicinity as much as you can. Things like toothbrushes, sanitary napkins, soaps, old clothing, and various other long-lasting items can help those people in making their existence a tad bit easier. I don't believe that we are all in this together, as it presupposes an equated sense of sacrifice, which is not inherent to everyone. Stay safe and help others. Today, as our guest, we have Dr. Kathryn Hummel, an Australian writer, ethnographer, poet, and author. Her diverse work has been published and presented worldwide, and she has been recognized with the Pushcart Prize nomination and the Dorothy Porter Prize at the 2013 Lord Mayor's Creative Writing Awards in Melbourne. She is a former writer-in-residence with the Australian Poetry Association, and she is currently a visiting assistant professor at IIT Hyderabad. That is exactly where I got to talk to her. We start off the podcast by Kathryn telling us about her work in Bangladesh as an Australian youth ambassador for sustainable development in the country and her subsequent doctoral research over there regarding gender and identity. She goes in depth about the problems of gender-conflicted persons in the country and how she came across many of their experiences. We must advise that the conversation may get very real very soon, as it has content that talks about molestation and some other gruesome acts. So a part of the conversation might not be entirely fitting for the weak-hearted. The talk then evolves into a general discussion about the appraisal of gender identity as a central issue in the 21st century. We talk about the difficult practice of merging research and art and how it can be managed, if at all possible. We end with a discussion about the disparity in teaching and learning ways of the Indian education versus the Australian system. We found the talk to be specifically interesting because of the many new perspectives it brought, and we hope that you would enjoy it too. So without further ado, Dr. Kathryn Hummel. Good afternoon, Kathryn.
Good afternoon.
So is it Kathryn or Kathryn?
Catherine. It's 2 syllables. The way it's spelled, yeah.
How was your time in Bangladesh? And how did you end up being there? I know you said it was for a residency, but what brought you there, and can you just tell us a little about it?
Sure. Well, the residency was just my latest trip to Bangladesh. There have been many, like I come and go to and from India a lot. I started off in Bangladesh. I first went there in 2007, and I actually went in a program called the Australian Youth Ambassadors for Development. And I guess it's kind of like the Peace Corps. The US has the Peace Corps, Australia has AAD, whatever program it is now, where they basically just send people, volunteers overseas to work normally with NGOs for, sustainable development purposes to kind of further Australia's aid, foreign aid money. It's funded through a government program. So I got chosen for Bangladesh, and I didn't know anything about Bangladesh at all, really. And I think I deliberately didn't want to know. I just wanted to go there and find out what it was like. So that was my first year in Bangladesh, was with that program, working for NGOs.
So was there any particular problem that you were told to address in Bangladesh, or was there, it could be women empowerment, it could be poverty, or like what was your profile there, if I may?
Well, I think it was based on the fact that I had studied English and gender studies at university. I'd had my I had my BA in hand by then, and I was placed with an NGO called Engender Health, which had to do with women's, women's fertility and kind of maternal health. I worked on a program to do with obstetric fistula, which is a condition that women face when they have prolonged childbirth, where the baby's head actually wears away parts of the tissue around their reproductive areas, and it can cause leakages of urine and feces. So that there's basically a hole where there shouldn't be. And it's not only a medical condition, but in Bangladesh, it's a kind of social stigma attached to it as well, where women get abandoned by their families because that they're very difficult to care for and they're smelly, and it's a big social issue as well as a medical.
Is it the reason for this problem that arises? Is it because the pregnancy goes longer than it should?
Yes, and it also has to do with women not being able to reach medical care in time because of bad roads or things like that. So it usually happens with labour at home. So the NGO I was working with had several programs, I think including midwifery in rural villages in Bangladesh, and just trying to get better access for women in labour to have medical attention. I think it was training women in villages, if I recall, to have some midwife experience, so this wouldn't occur as frequently.
Mm-hmm. And how long was that for?
I was there for about eight months, I think, with that NGO. Then I got moved to another one, Hunger Free World, and again working with women. This was not microcredit loans or microloans, but it was actually grants given to women in villages so they could set up their own small businesses. There wasn't any repayment needed. So Hunger Free World, I think, had its, or probably still has, its head office in Japan. And so donations were given, and then these donations got given to women directly to set up businesses so they could support their families in village areas.
So I was in Bangladesh, I think I told you, for Chobi Mela, and I was in around Dhanmondi area only. And there were certain things that were a big cultural shock for me. So I can imagine there might have been several that were to you. So can you illustrate some of those?
Sure. Well, I used to stay in Dhanmondi, actually. That's the south of the city. That was where I used to live and hang out. But I remember arriving, and we were staying in a group of other Australian volunteers, and we were staying in Bonani, which is in the north of the city. And I think I just was really frightened, not of anything in particular, but just by how different it was. Like nothing at all was similar. I think I was really frightened of the traffic. I remember like trying to cross a road or whatever really freaked the hell out of me, to be honest.
Are you aware of the recent clashes and riots that happened in Bangladesh, which were initiated because of traffic problems?
Yes, and I know that our mutual connection, Shahidul Alam, was jailed following his support of those protests. Yeah. But back to cultural differences. Yeah, they're so vast. Like I can't even say. I think immediately having to dress appropriately for a Muslim country, although Bangladesh is really quite secular. I can't imagine what it would be like living in, say, Saudi or something like that. Even eating, using my right hand, because I am left-handed, and having to remember to use my right hand for money and for eating and all sorts of things. That was difficult at the beginning.
It's not that vivid now in India, but at homes, even elders will ask you to only transact money using your right hand. These are very small things that go unnoticed to a resident, maybe of India. It will go unnoticed to me. But these small things, somebody like you can point them out. So, after you were done with your NGO work, did you go back to Australia and then come back to Bangladesh for your residency?
I did. Well, actually, in between in between that, I came back. I went back to Bangladesh for my PhD research. I think it kind of riffed off that NGO experience because my PhD was a narrative ethnography about women's life stories and women from very different backgrounds and of very different identities. And I kind of chose this subject because I wasn't particularly satisfied with the way I was working with NGOs as a communications specialist or writer. It seemed to me that the women's lives were being used to fit a particular agenda. And so I wanted to really get women to tell me what they wanted to tell me about their lives instead of only just picking bits and pieces from it. So a bit more in-depth without being led by me consciously.
Okay. So you have talked in a lot of works of yours. The term post-colonial has recurred like a motif a lot of times. So what is about post-colonialism? First of all, what does it mean to you? And what is about it that interests you so much?
In post-colonialism, I haven't really thought about it for a while in terms of definition. It to me, it's certainly is a continuing condition, and I think that this point has been made by a lot of people who've been very adversely affected by colonialism, including First Nations people of Australia. So I have a colleague, a poet, Janine Lane, who says there's no such thing as post-colonial because we are still suffering from it. Her community is, and I agree with that. So I guess I refer to post-colonialism always as something that's not post. So I usually use it as one word without a hyphen. But I think it just means that a certain era has passed and we're dealing with the fallout from that. And of course, India has had its own experience of colonialism. So there are similarities, I think, between, what goes on after colonialism. All countries probably experience, yeah.
So what about colonialism did you experience in Bangladesh, or the lack of it?
I suppose I always talk about post-colonialism in reference to my research because I had to be aware of it. I had to be aware of my position, even though I didn't personally colonize Bangladesh. It's more like having to acknowledge it because of the differences colonialism made in the world, say, developing. And coming from Australia as a researcher and attempting to investigate the lives of different women in Bangladesh, some of whom were, a lot worse off in terms of education and wealth than I was. And so I had to be aware of the kind of power dynamic in that relationship as a researcher. And I think post-colonialism has a lot to do with how these power dynamics have shaped the world and have shaped economics and things like gender and sexuality as well, which my research deals with a lot.
And okay, let's jump a little to your research. So what was it about? And I think you outlined it a bit beforehand, but can you just talk about it a little more? What was it about?
Well, I just went to Bangladesh and I found 4 women who would be willing to talk to me over several months about their lives. And some I knew had known previously. So one of my research participants, who was a massage therapist and a Hindu woman, so that's in the minority in Bangladesh. I'd known her from my previous visits. And then I got put in touch with other women through friends in Bangladesh. So Another of my research participants is transgender, identifies as a woman. Another is retiree now, worked for NGOs and is one of the, well, back then when I did my research, one of the only, outed gay women in Bangladesh, and a Muslim woman as well. And then another very staunch feminist English lecturer who I'd actually known for some time in previous visits, who I also kind of asked, could she be part of my research? So women from very different backgrounds, as I said before. And what I did really to make my narrative ethnography was just really sit and chat to them and, have cups of tea. And I went to one of my research participants' house often. I visited their homes and they visited mine. And sometimes we would meet in social situations off the record. But I would just sit and talk to them and record the talks. And then, of course, my power as a researcher came in when I had to select what I was actually going to include in the ethnography and what I didn't. Yeah, I guess my motivation varied. I think it was more about trying to see if I could actually establish a rapport as a woman who was having a very different experience in Bangladesh because of my own identity and the women that I talked to. Whether we could still connect at some level despite these cultural barriers, language barriers, and so on. And that was important for, again, the post-colonial aspect, knowing that I had the power to include or exclude or edit someone else's experience. There had to be a lot of trust built in those relationships. And I think there were... at the time, everyone participated willingly. Some of them, especially Shardana, the massage therapist, she was quite shy, I think, about not talking to me, but I think thinking about parts of her life that she didn't, because she was a working class woman and just worked to support her family. Getting her to sit and consider how she felt when, her family arranged for her to get married to her husband. I said, did you like him? And she just kind of said, it wasn't really a question of liking. She showed me up as being very naive, and of course my cultural expectations or prejudices, I guess, thinking that you have to like the man you're going to get married to. I mean, that's outrageous, really, in her reality. And that was fine.
So similar to that, can you outline one or two more incidences about the lives of your participants in a way that the listeners can somewhat get an idea of not the general population of women in Bangladesh, but let's say the transgendered person that you were referring to?
Yes, remarkable person. They all are and were and are. I don't know how to really refer to them in what tense. Kota is an activist. So she works with different NGOs in Bangladesh to represent kind of rights of transgender community and also of sex workers in Bangladesh too. And she's also a trained dancer. She's a trained classical Bangla dancer and teaches dance as well to children in her neighborhood. And her story, I remember reading it quite recently. I was in Bangladesh and I gave a lecture at a university there about narrative ethnography and what it was like. And I read a bit of Kota's story, and I remember some of the feedback I got was, "Oh, this is like every other transgender story that we hear of in Bangladesh." Like what is special about it? And I thought, well, there's something special about everyone's life. It could just be the way I've written it. But Kota's story included, she talked about her relationship with her mother and having to conceal her gender identity from her mother. She talked about growing up and watching pregnant women and wondering what it was like to have a child inside of her body, trying to put on makeup when she was a teenager and being told that, boys don't do that, go out and act like a proper boy.
Is it safe to assume that she was raised as a boy?
She was raised as a boy, yeah. And I think she didn't really identify when, it's probably in her like early 20s, that she maybe realized that she identified as a woman. She talked about always looking up to celebrities like George Michael, who were quite kind of androgynous. So yeah, lots of things. She also is a survivor of horrific sexual assault and rape. She was sexually molested as a child by a teacher, and and she recounted at least one very brutal story of being raped. She and some other transgender people. She was attending a wedding as a dancer, and was detained in the village that she was visiting with her friends, and they were raped. Yeah.
Did you find the theme of sexual crimes being very common in Bangladesh? Because I read one of your works, I think it is called Before and After a Night Out, and you have also outlined a similar incident where, not to that extent at least, but at least the approach of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think this is in a very simple term, is it a very common problem?
I think it is. I think it's a very common problem, and I think it's a very unspoken problem. Because, part of the result of me writing or talking about my own experience of sexual assault in Bangladesh was that people would say, "Oh, it happens to us all the time." It's not really reported, and I think that is common throughout the world. That sexual assault or rapes are often not reported. The statistics we have are based on reported cases only, and I think in a country like Bangladesh, where a great number of women are disempowered, politically, socially, economically, it's something that goes on in their day-to-day life, and they may not even discuss it amongst themselves, let alone to, say, a police officer or something.
Do you think the religion also plays a very big role in this, even though you have said that it is a secular country, but the day-to-day lives of the citizens, I think it's very heavily, I won't say policed, because it might not be politically correct to say that, but do you think it has a very high impact on the social thinking of the whole population?
What? Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So, as you said before, that one of the major problems is that the incidents are never reported, right? And that is because they consider it to be a regular occurrence and something that is supposed to just be lived by. Just go with it, sort of a mentality. So do you think religion plays a role in that?
I think the concept of sharom, of shame, does, yeah, certainly. Women, wouldn't speak out because it brings shame to them, to their families, especially, I suppose, survivors of rape in a country where women are still expected to be virgins at marriage, even in a country where a gynecologist won't examine an unmarried woman because virginity is very much prized. And that's, across the major religions in Bangladesh. Yes, certainly religion, I think, would play a part in women's, not inability, but their willingness to speak up about sexual assault and harassment.
Talking of religions, how would you fare the three countries, Bangladesh, India and Australia, in their secularity of their day-to-day lives? From your perspective, obviously.
Yeah. it's difficult for me to say because I was christened in the Protestant church, but kind of grew up really without a religion. Where I did engage with it, it was always Christianity. And so I suppose I look on other religions as, as more cultural constructs, I guess, with an ethnographer's eye, if I can say that. And probably people would find it surprising to have me describe Bangladesh as a secular country. And I think that's always been the intent of Bangladesh, although, of course, things are changing now. But in people's day-to-day life, say Islam was, just integrated into daily life. For people who believed, it became part of the way they behaved towards other people, just like any major religion is. This kind of code of ethics, but also just if you have God in you, often you behave in a certain way. And it wasn't fancy, and it wasn't with the intent to proselytize or educate people about religion. It was just a set of rules or guidelines by which people lived. And I find any religion like that very beautiful. And any person who lives like that, I find it very, I'm filled with admiration. And I find that goes on in Bangladesh, in Australia to some extent. Again, I probably encountered more religion in Bangladesh than I did in Australia. In India, I find religions become very politicized. I mean, it is in Bangladesh too, but in India in recent years, it's so closely linked to politics. Religion and politics are so closely linked that I find it less secular. Like I find there is certainly an agenda that is going on in India.
I think I resonate with your thought of admiring people who can actually live a life with faith, because when I grew up in a marginally religious family, and I was quite ardent about being religious, and but then in my rebel years, in my post-graduation, it all came, like I started understanding how the world works and the more scientific part of it, and then I completely abandoned that thought. But then in the recent times, let's say in the recent 1 or 2 years, I have started to figure out that yes, though religion might not be very important right now, it has served a very big purpose in the past years of uniting people to a certain extent. And this might not be really the true face of religion. Of course, it varies from country to country, but that is my own personal understanding that I'm still coming across. Okay, so one thing I wanted to know about your work was that it very seamlessly oscillates between research and art. How do you reliably coincide them so that the research stays unbiased and the art grows subjectively?
Oh, it's such a big question, really. I think what I learned while looking into narrative ethnography to such an extent is that, your research will be biased to some extent. Maybe not the theory that you quote, but you're always shaping it according to your own perspective. And the important thing about practicing as an anthropologist, even though I'm not one, in these times is to say, well, I'm not objective. How can you possibly cut off your subjectivity, especially when you are talking and being amongst people? I mean, it may be different in a lab, I don't know. But if you're a social scientist, I think it's very difficult. And admitting this subjectivity has to really be done for an ethnographer to have really any kind of clout. I suppose this idea of research is always subjective does feed into creative arts-based research, which narrative ethnography is part of. So you're actually presenting your research data as a creative work, like a non-fiction book, or like a painting or a song or dance, whatever your practice happens to be. You can either investigate a subject through creative arts, which I do to some extent with my poetry, and unconsciously when I was staying in Bangladesh, I was writing poetry at the same time. Or you can, as I said, present data as a creative art form. And I think there is a crossover between those two, but it can naturally be balanced by really being self-reflective about your research process and trying to trace as an artist what process you go through, because all art is really based in research. But I think when it's in the academic realm, you really have to keep track of everything.
Keeping track of things. Do you think art, it has been kept track of in the past times, but do you think it can still be done in today's world? Because I see just a flood of art, and if somebody calls it an art, you cannot deny it, because in the postmodernist world, whatever the creator says, one has to, at least from their perspective, agree to it to a certain extent. Do you still think research can keep up with art?
I think so. I think where research is dedicated to keeping up with art, it will. At the moment, I'm teaching a course on contemporary poets at IIT, living poets. And I think the question that I was asking my class today is, what makes a living poet distinctive and what makes their work resonate while they're yet living. Like there's been no real theory. They haven't been studied for decades and decades in an English literature classroom, because they are still developing their careers and developing their voice. But I think historically, people who are prominent while they're living, they're not often forgotten, especially in a digital age where everything is, there's so much information and archives are being gathered all the time. So I think keeping track of art, even though I agree with you, there is a flood of people practicing, and we're even more aware now because of the internet. But keeping track of people, I think is going to go on as long as someone finds them worthy. People are artists are forgotten and unearthed again all the time, and revived and hailed as, neglected geniuses. I think it's a cycle that's been going on, and I think will continue.
So we'll have the benefit of hindsight.
Yes,
It always will.
I think so, because that's where we kind of organize people into schools, like, the pre-Raphaelites and the Romantics and so on and so on. That's when people were seen as having themes and contexts that align them together.
So a very important and current topic of gender identity. I have recently talked to some geneticists, and they have their own view on it. But what do you say about it? I'll outline what my question is regarding it, and maybe you can comment on it. So I understand a person should be recognized as whatever identity they want to. But my question was forming when I read that there are some around 20-25 pronouns that we need to follow now, and there have been several big names attached to commenting on this movement. Let's say Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and many more, and they all have their opinions. But what would you say about that? We are not going into the ethics of it right now. We are, I think, not the biological part of it right now, but what do you have to say about this particular, not a problem, but this particular confusion that is happening?
Well, I mean, as a feminist, I oppose gender essentialism very strongly, because it means that it's creating a binary of gender. Men are, say, good at engineering, for example. Women are good at poetry, because that's just one example. Just because they have genetic predispositions that affect the way their minds and bodies work. I don't really agree with that stance, and so being anti-gender essentialist, I suppose, means I'm certainly pro. I support the trans community, and I support the idea of socially constructed or individually constructed gender identity in general. I think there are cases where there is, as you say, there's a lot of confusion about it. I haven't heard of these 20 pronouns. I think in English, if you don't want to be known by a gendered pronoun, you choose they or them, which is a plural, of course, and not perfect. I think in Sweden there is hen. That's a gender-neutral pronoun. And I think there's probably been a bit of a push to introduce that in some equivalent into English as well. What was the question exactly, though? I'm discussing what I feel about it.
But I think you've sort of addressed it.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to another one. Yeah. So why do you think this problem of gender identity has surfaced right now? By right now, we can say in the past decade or so. Yeah. So why do you think that it is happening now? And
yeah, it's a very interesting question, because I mean, people who have been, say, asexual, gender neutral, transgender, and so on, have been around since the human race has been around, I am sure. And I think it's more to do with, almost these, talking about artists going through these phases of being forgotten and then celebrated. So I think it has to do a lot with how society goes through its own cycles, and how different cultures regard, say, transgender people, and why has it become so prominent now? I don't know. I think certainly in the Western world, say from the 70s to 80s, that was a big movement for LGBT community in general, probably more like the queer, gay and lesbian community. Gay rights was really the topic of those decades, I would say, in terms of sexuality, as well as women's liberation and the right to choose in terms of pregnancy. But yeah, why is kind of gender become another discussion now? It's very...
And I'm talking about the same topic and revisiting our old conversation right now. You also said that the notions and about your everyday life can vary so much from country to country. Like we are seeing this problem being addressed in certain countries and not in others. And
I suppose I'm thinking in an Australian context. My views are very curated. Like, say, on Twitter, as someone who is, say, left wing, for want of a better word, and progressive and feminist, and in support of the disenfranchised, for want of a better word again. I suppose that the information I get regarding the trans community is positive, like it's in support of the trans community. And I'm aware of a lot of the criticism too, especially from radical feminists. saying that, you can't claim our experience as women, unless you bleed and, unless you go through what we've been through. You can't just morph and call yourself a woman. There's this idea, again, fixed in biology, that being a woman is only this particular closed experience, and there's no other way of being a woman or expressing yourself as a woman. And of course, the same applies to people who have transitioned into men. So the prominence that I get, I think it's because maybe it's just about time that again, a minority community has not had a voice, and it just so happens in whatever kind of nuanced socio-political atmosphere that we've created, that these issues are coming up again and again and gaining momentum as they do. And you can't really say why it's becoming so prominent now. It's just the issue for the time that we're living in.
So, a tentative solution, or a tentative, not a solution, but an idea someone floated around. I read this in the book Gene by Siddharth Mukherjee. He said that, I don't know if he said it, but it was written in that maybe we can address people by their biological gender up until they're 18, or up until the age that they are able to make a decision, and then let them decide for themselves. Why I'm asking that is because I have read a lot of articles where parents have started the gender transformation hormonal treatment as soon as the child has shown any sort of inclination towards any other gender. Let's say a 6-year-old boy is showing signs that he might want to be a girl, and they have started the hormonal treatment there and then. So biologically it might be beneficial, because as a child the body can adapt better. But what if it is just a phase up until that they are able to age till where they can make a decision for themselves? So what would you say about that? Or do you have any other systems or ideas that might benefit or might calm down the chaos that is happening?
It's such a fraught issue, and of course, being cisgendered myself, I can't even imagine having made this realization about myself and how to navigate it, or as a parent or as a person going through it myself. But because you do hear about people who said, oh, if only my parents realized, I wanted to be another gender, my life could have been so much easier. How do you put really an age on when someone can make a decision like that for themselves? You could say children's brains aren't properly developed yet, so they're not capable of doing that. But 18 is the age where you can start voting, start drinking, start driving in some countries. So it's like the age of adult, but it's like being determined by governments and not by our own feeling, or not by when we feel that a decision is right for ourselves. So I would like to leave it in the hands of the individual, really. I think that's probably a bit more sensitive to someone who is confused or wanting to transition to another gender. I don't think it should be regulated. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Do you think there might be a push about this certain topic because it is so hot right now? And let's say if I have it's completely hypothetical, but let's say if I have a dream of becoming an astronaut, and if I was a child in the age of the space race, when it was happening between the US and Russia, it might have been an idea that might have achieved a lot of recognition and comments from the society. But if I say that right now, it is just another career path to take. But do you think that is also influencing the decision making of children right now? Let's not talk about adults, because this topic is being pushed right now, pushed in a good manner, that yes, it is a topic that should be addressed, and it has been a problem that a lot of people have faced over the past a lot of years, centuries. And because it is being addressed right now, do you think a child who might not have gone for a sex change or an operation would decide to do it just because it is being talked about right now?
Hmm. I suppose, I mean, the benefits of any discussion of this kind about gender and being trans or transitioning is that people don't feel they're alone and aren't ashamed of it, and maybe are even quicker to identify certain gender ambiguities or impulses within themselves. So I mean, it's really such a traumatic thing, I think, transitioning. I don't understand why someone would opt for it unless they truly felt it was necessary for their lives. If they couldn't live as, the gender they were born into. So I don't know whether it's, could be adopted just because it's trendy, and children, all to the good if children say, well, today I feel like a boy and tomorrow, and, today I feel like a girl. And I think that's fine. I think that's very important for the process of growing into yourself and your identity and maybe working it out finally. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I really don't think that, it's somehow setting a precedent to say, oh, you must choose a gender. I think it's just opening out a way, it's saying, yes, be free to discuss it if you don't feel comfortable. This is, you can make a decision about it. I think it's a positive thing.
I think it is, the awareness is catching significant traction in India. Have you come across people who have talked about it to you in this particular country?
Not really. I've had some discussions with people from the queer community.
They had a significant win because of the Supreme Court ruling.
Yes.
I was very happy for it.
Yeah. I remember I was too. But I suppose the only transgender people I see in India are, again, in the very, say, traditional roles, which I learned about in Bangladesh for Hijra or Hijra. And that is, collecting money from people in traffic or in shops or whatever. In Bangladesh, the trans community there are said to bring good luck at weddings and births of children. They go and dance and so on, and they're somehow, objectified or iconized, if you like, as a symbol of luck. I don't know how it is in India.
It is quite on the similar veins, because they come to houses who have just had babies or any celebrations, but in all honesty, the money being given to them is not out of, at least from my personal experience, the money being given to them, it is not out of personal wish for good luck. It is more of an avoidance that, okay, you can take and just move on.
Yeah.
It is just so uncomfortable right now for people to be in company, and especially in company of people who are outwardly expressing their transness, if there is a word like that.
Yeah. And so, I guess the trans community here is prominent because it's a minority, because it's still ostracized as well as a community. And so, as my research participant Kota was saying, she was looking forward to the time where trans people could just be in society as trans people and no one would be frightened or discriminate. Just, another citizen, having a job and earning a living and having a family. The privileges that, I guess, cisgender people have.
I think it is too early to say anything for sure on this topic right now, because as you said, with societies, ideologies will change with time, and again we might have the benefit of hindsight looking back that of course we should have paid attention to it. And I think let's see what the future holds for us. But I can see the discussion gaining significant traction in the mainstream conversations these days.
Yeah, and it's probably because it's, again, maybe part of a backlash against prevailing political conservatism around the world as well. Like, again, this kind of fabric, this socio-political fabric that we've created for this time, kind of throws up certain issues, and just happens to be this transgenderism.
Another topic, another part of discussion I wanted to have with you was about the sort of students that you're coming across, especially in Hyderabad. And just what do you say about the reception that people are getting from you, younger people, and you are getting from them, in the sense that how easy is it to converse, or whatever challenges you might be facing?
Well, I've only really just started teaching here in Hyderabad, but I talk to students a lot, particularly postgrads, and it varies as individuals vary. I suppose the class I'm teaching at the moment, they are all, say, engineering, technology students, or science students, perhaps. And they are all opting to take this course to study contemporary poets and poetry. And so I asked them, like, are you just doing this because you have to fill up a credit in your course, They said, no. Or are you interested in poetry? They said, no, we're interested in poetry. And I appreciate that. And it's a small group, and maybe, a group of students who are probably a bit hesitant in talking about how a poem makes them feel. I'm always asking my students, annoying them, entirely by saying, well, how does this poem make you feel? Stop thinking with your technology hat. Stop thinking with this lobe of your brain. Think with your, the instinctual side, not the logical side, the side that links to creativity and emotion and sensation and all these things. And so, and perhaps I'm reading them wrong. They're probably engaged with that already. They just maybe don't often get a forum to express it, or have people ask them, what do you feel about this? Of course, everyone feels. But I've got this idea. I was actually talking to my students about it today, about this binary, I feel that, say, science and art is completely complementary. And I think Einstein, thought the same thing. So two geniuses together. And but maybe I think the way the certain process that people go through to get to an institution like IIT is that the arts are neglected in their studies. And I see this often. Friends of mine in India who are now artists or photographers or whatever, they've done their engineering degree, and then they decided to pursue what they loved once that was over for them. And that was a lot of the times to please their families.
Yeah, I think there is a significant push from their family. And because India still believes in living with the family, even when they're adults, even when they have their own kids, they tend to live together. There is a very heavy role played in the decision making of every individual by their families.
Yeah. But in terms of how the students receive me, probably is something of an oddity. I think. I think my the way I express, probably not the way I teach. My method's probably the same, but just the way I express myself, maybe slightly strange or amusing or what have you. Probably I'm a bit more casual with myself. Again, I don't have a benchmark. I just do what I do. But I receive, my reception of them is exceptionally bright in various ways, not just the way, the engineering way, but receptive and I think open to open to encouragement of different perspectives, which is what I'm trying to do as a teacher.
If you had to give them one advice, at least the students that you have come across, it could be about how to become more holistic in their outlook towards the world, or it could be anything. It could be about their dressing or anything. What would you say to them?
I think I've given this advice to my students in the past in Australia, and that is to go into great detail, go into in depth.
I don't think that should be a problem with IIT students.
Yeah, I think.
But the direction that they look at might be very different.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, people going back to poetry, people might read a poem and say, "Okay, this is what it means. This is what it's about. This is how I interpret it." But then, they might not go and look at the background of the poem or the poet writing it or anything like that. It's just about a surface, almost, technically correct, saying about rhyme schemes or whatever. Yes, fine, correct. But yeah, I think there is just a lot more detail to things, and that perhaps.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And adding to that, students here tend to take things at face value. They tend to remember things at face value till it gets the job done, and there's no step beyond it. At least not from any personal affliction.
Yeah. Again, I don't know the students well. I don't know every student, and I don't know my class students well enough to say much. But I know there is, the brain is a finely calibrated organ. It's an organ. And it needs to work harmoniously, and where parts of your brain, or the absorption of certain knowledge has been given precedent over another. I think there is a natural impulse to have it balanced, and through any means. And I suppose as a person who is teaching, I guess, subjects that relate to a creative field, that's what I hope to contribute in some way.
So, Catherine, before we end this lovely conversation, if people want to find you, where can they find your work, or where would you direct them to?
Well, in person, you can find me at IIT Hyderabad, office C133 cabin E. But if you wanted to read my work, I think I am famous on Google. You can type in my name on a search engine, and it will actually be me who comes up. But I have a website, which is www.kathrynhummel.com.
Can you just spell it out?
Certainly. It's KathrynHummel. And I am very excited to say I have a new book coming out in October.
And where can people purchase it? At your website?
At the publisher's website. So that's on my website. Math Paper Press in Singapore.
Is it the one that is called Lamentville?
Lamentville, yes. And I will be having, I hope, some events going on regarding that book in Hyderabad as well.
Just quickly, can you just briefly tell us what that book is about?
It's about the digital era, the digital age, and how maybe what we lost or what we've gained as we go through this process of changing the way we communicate, the way we remember things, the way we interact with each other as human beings. So it's all poems relating to or reflecting on those themes.
And why the inclination towards a little dreariness in the title?
I was thinking about that today, because there is not, the book is called Lamentville, but there's no poem at all called Lamentville in it. It just came to me, the title. And I think it's yeah, it's to do with the rumination on loss. And loss is not necessarily a bad thing when you think about it. I mean, laments, I guess I write more sad poetry than happy.
But as I pointed out earlier, it has a certain beauty to it, all of them. I might not be very qualified to judge poetry because I don't really get it. Poetry, I do understand writing, but yeah.
But you feel something.
Yeah, I do.
Well, that's all you need sometimes.
Catherine, it was lovely to have you here. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you for being such a sport. I know we did not get off at the right foot in the beginning, but I'm glad we had this conversation.
Thank you for having me talk. It's been a pleasure.
Same.